Welcome. I want to reflect on Mark chapter 10, verses 46 to 52, and Jesus heals a blind man. Together they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and he followed Jesus along the road. And Jesus now is going up to Jerusalem and to the last week or so of his life. He's going up finally to the cross and to Easter. New life for the whole world, new life for Bartimaeus, new life for each one of us. Before we jump into the sermon, I'd just like to say that Jesus, in the Gospel of Mark, there are three big times when Jesus is teaching his disciples about what sort of Messiah he's going to be. He's not going to be this super powerful new King David. He's going to be a suffering Messiah who gives away his life on the cross. And in that way, he brings forgiveness and healing for the whole world. Now, those three major bits of teaching are bracketed by two healings of blind men. And that's just the way Mark sets it up. And in Mark 8, we've got a man, Bethsaida, who's blind. Jesus does some really interesting work with him. He spits onto his eyes, works his fingers over his face there, and says, "Can you see?" And the man blinks and looks around and says, "Well, I can see people, but they sort of look like trees walking around." And Jesus does some more work on his eyes. And then the man can see. And this two-part healing suggests that he doesn't see straight away, and that's a pointer to the disciples who certainly do not see what Jesus is teaching them about what sort of Messiah he's going to be. And maybe that's part of how we learn to need to see our lives. Things don't always go straight forward, but there is always God's grace and mercy and support, no matter what. So that's Mark 8. Here in Mark 10, Bartimaeus sees, is healed, and he follows Jesus on the way. And Jesus is going to Jerusalem and the cross, and Bartimaeus will see things that will change his very life. First point I want to make is creating a disturbance. And there are times when creating a disturbance is absolutely the right thing to do. Most of us are trained not to disturb or create a ruckus. And in fact, we tend to look down on people who think that they're entitled to just have whatever they want happen all the time and create a stir about it. But there are times when we need to listen to ourselves about something that's not right, and then we need to speak up. Years ago, when we lived in Esperance, Western Australia, my wife, as a community social worker, worked for the Department of Community Services. And part of her role was to help protect children, and there was a program called Protective Behaviours. And I still remember the two key things from that, and I checked in with her for this sermon. First thing was, you have the right to feel safe all the time. And the second big point was, if you're not feeling safe, speak to an adult about it. And if the first adult doesn't listen, go to another one. Keep going until you get someone who hears what you have to say. Protective behaviours for children, vital. And it's also important for us. When something's not right in us, we need to look and listen. And if it's not our fault, we need to speak up until someone hears it and does something about it. And maybe that speaking up and hearing is taking an issue to God and saying, this isn't right in my life. What are we going to do about it? The other thing to think about is when life's going really well for us and we're fine and we're in a good space, maybe it's time to just stop and look around at our family, at the people we work with, or the people we worship with, or the people we socialize with. Are there people whose voices are being ignored? Just go back into your box. That's too hard for us to deal with. Listen to those who aren't able to even speak, but maybe need to. What can we do to listen and help and support them? Second thing that fascinated me from this text is the man throws aside his cloak. And that's significant because his cloak is literally his security blanket. That's what he wraps himself in at night to keep protected and to stay warm or dry. There's probably pockets in that cloak, and maybe all his worldly possessions and wealth are in that cloak. And he just throws it aside when he hears that Jesus is calling for him. It's interesting, just before in this chapter, the rich young man who comes to Jesus and says, I want to follow you. And Jesus says, okay, let your riches go. He can't. That's his practical God. That's where he puts his trust in. That's what he needs to survive. But here our blind man knows that something more important is happening. And so he throws aside his cloak and goes to Jesus. When he gets to Jesus, Jesus simply asks him, what do you want? So often we assume that we know what other people want or need and jump straight in. There are times when we need to just simply ask, what do you want? It's showing respect to the other person, it's paying courtesy, and maybe what they want is quite different from what we think they want or need. And it's actually a very good, simple way to pray. Before you go to bed at night, just as you're thinking back on the day or having a little thank you prayer or commending yourself to God before you go to sleep, look ahead to tomorrow and pray what you want. What do you actually want for tomorrow? It's a very simple way of praying, but it's actually a very rich and important way. Try it out. And you might be surprised at what you actually find yourself asking for. What do you really want? It's a good way of praying. Try it. See what happens. Finally, he follows Jesus on the way. And Jesus is about to walk up from Jericho, walk all the way up into Jerusalem. He's going to enter the temple. He's going to cleanse the temple. He's going to have these big, tricky discussions with people. He's going to challenge them. And by the end of that week, he's going to be arrested, tried, and hung on the cross to die. So he's following Jesus on the way. Our lives aren't always straightforward or simple. They're not one victory after another, but they are always about, finally, Easter and new life. There is always a way through, and we never walk the journey alone. Hopefully, there are people, physical people alongside us who support us and encourage us, and whom we support and encourage. Sometimes there aren't, but we always are going with Jesus and following him, and our lives are always covered over by his deep love and healing and comfort and support and challenge when we need it for each one of us. He followed Jesus on the way. May you be blessed as you discover that you also of following and going with Jesus on the way.